Christian, and so as ever to the front pages, the Sunday Telegraph has a Brexit story there about the SNP potentially derailing trade deals and the England rugby team having been derailed very effectively, not by the SNP but by Scotland yesterday. I never watch these games because whenever I do, Scotland loses. So I didn't watch it and Scotland won. QED. Sunday Times there has a story about Philip Green of Topshop. And also the Archbishop of Canterbury warning of xenophobia and self-pity after Brexit, and a lot about that cabinet meeting inside. There's the Mail on Sunday. They've got a story about their helplines for heroes, helplines for soldiers campaign. They've been running for a long time, and they seem to have got a breakthrough on that. And again, more of the politics inside. All sorts of things to talk about. Where's the Observer? I'm going to get the Observer. Here we go. The Observer has a whole lot of senior Labour figures, Neil Kinnock and many more, piling pressure on Jeremy Corbyn. They want him to commit to joining the single market as well as staying in the single market as well as the customs union. We'll be talking about much more of that before. Let's start, however, Katie Perrier. You were at the heart of the May operation for a long time, and we see the May operation in this big spread in the Sunday Times. There's the library scene I was talking about at the beginning of the programme, all the ministers gathered round, and a very detailed briefing from Number 10 in that paper.
Oh, good morning, Andrew. Yes, it's a cracking long read by Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times, but it goes in great detail about what happened during the day. They moved from room to room in a Cluedo-style scenery. They left their mobile phones and had them taken away, so they discussed Brexit and many other things over shortbread and cups of tea. And surprisingly, it felt that it seems to be they got on. It's a brilliant piece of briefing from Number 10 because great pictures of who's who in the room. And some very good comments
here. I mean, there is a fairly detailed account of what they have now agreed. Can we just go through that?
Absolutely. So they've talked about a demand for mutual recognition, standards on goods traded between UK and the EU. They talked about a public commitment to make sure those standards are the same, as high as the EU. A pledge to keep rules and regulations substantially similar, but also there's some read-through here about what Greg Clark has done. He stood up for the automotive sector, saying that divergence doesn't protect these jobs. So a real kind of a run-through of everybody's role in the day.
Is it fair to say that the essence of the deal is we all start off in the same place, but over time Britain will be able to diverge in all sorts of different ways, and there will be some kind of agreement or mechanism not involving the European Court which will oversee that? That's the essence of the deal. Absolutely,
but of course the EU told us we couldn't cherry-pick, that we couldn't pick what we wanted.
So will it be sellable?
Exactly. So the EU may well turn around and say, well, that's what your starting position is, but we don't like it very much. And of course, we need a meaningful vote in Parliament at some point. So it's whether or not the rest of the parliamentarians think that this is good enough.
So we're all scrabbling around trying to understand the changes. Big changes as well, June, on the Labour side, the Observer story there.
Indeed, and you mentioned it briefly just a moment ago. So front page of the Observer, the Labour alliance piles pressure on Corbyn over Brexit stance. So what's happened is 80 senior Labour figures have come together to put pressure on Jeremy Corbyn, not just to back remaining in some form of customs union, but also to remain in the single market.
June, can I just stop you there? Because, again, people get confused about these things. But the customs union is, as it were, the great ring fence around the entire EU. And if we stay inside that or something like it, then we have to take EU rules. And the EU negotiates for us.
Totally.
Therefore, many people, including Neil Kinnock and others, are saying, well, if we're going to do that, if we're going to take the EU rules for that, why not just stay in the single market as well?
Totally, which is about the movement of goods. And obviously, we do have to look at the four freedoms, but what we'll have to decide is whether or not it's worth it once we know the terms of the deal. And what these 80 senior Labour figures are saying, like you said, Neil Kinnock, Helena Kennedy, Doreen Lawrence, Chukwuemeka, what they're saying is that if Jeremy Corbyn wants to fund his anti-austerity measures, that the only way to do it is to remain in the single market.
Yes, and of course this is highly political because there is a motion down to an amendment to the trade bill backed by Anna Soubry and Tory Remainers. And the question is, if the Labour Party gets alongside that, then Theresa May can potentially lose her majority on the absolutely crucial question of the day.
Absolutely. Well, of course, they've pushed those votes back into the other end of the spring, but the Select Committee chairmen are turning around and saying, well, we might have a vote earlier. And so they're all getting together. So this is looking like it won't go away.
No.
You can't kick this down the road forever because we have the actual negotiations at the end of this, and it has to be done by then.
But a brilliant quote in the Sunday Times basically talks about how she's carrying on spinning those plates. It's a very difficult job, and the more you kick that down the road, hopefully we will be in a better place. We will have some concessions from the EU, and maybe we might win some people around.
Wait and see. Katie, the other really, really important story today is the horror going on again in Syria. We thought things had calmed down, and they have got much, much worse over the last 2 weeks.
They have. We have this ceasefire agreed by the UN. Russia doesn't look like to have vetoed it, so it looks like it will go ahead. But of course, whenever there is some kind of ceasefire, there is heavy bombing beforehand, which shows that they try and get as much done before they have to abide by this ceasefire. It's shocking scenes, and we've been here before. And at what point do we feel that we can intervene or that something else can be done? Parliamentarians feel helpless. We feel helpless, and we can't even think, well, we just give our money to the aid charities because we're not quite sure that's going to end up in the way that we thought we could donate to in the first place.
Absolutely. But this is the penalty, as it were, of deciding not to intervene at the beginning. We intervened in Iraq, and to many people's views, that went horribly wrong. So this time we don't intervene, and the penalty we pay is standing on as horrified and completely impotent observers.
And as Johnny Mercer says, the Conservative MP, at least force yourself to watch these pictures, because if you can't do anything about it, at least don't turn a blind eye to what's going on.
And also, they can't be sure that Assad will keep to it either, so that's the other
June,
thing.
we've been talking a lot about ghastly scandals in the aid sector, and there's yet another one this morning in the Sunday Times or the Telegraph?
This one is in the Sunday Times, and yep, there's another one, the Mines Advisory Group. This is the anti-landmines charity that Princess Diana famously backed. They've been hit with terrible stories that many of their senior employees used prostitutes. And then there are 2 stories in the DRC where members actually had affairs with local women, and one apparently impregnated one of the women and abandoned her. And this is a charity that Prince Harry supports. So these stories are not going anywhere.
They're not going away. They're spreading in all directions.
Yeah.
Katie, let's turn to another of the really big stories of the moment we haven't talked about, is the university and college strike, because this is unprecedented. And, of course, students are in a completely new position now because they're consumers.
They are consumers. They're paying £9,250 a year for their fees, and not just that, many more in terms of living costs, and they're demanding a higher standard of return on their investment than they may have demanded before. So what we're seeing is that there's no let-up in the fact that these lecturers are going to continue to strike, and they're striking over pensions. They're going to lose something like £10,000 a year under the new rules.
And we should say a lot of these are people whose pensions wouldn't have been that big in the first place. So this is a really big chunk of their pensions, and they're suddenly not asked or negotiated with. They're just told you're losing all this money.
And of course, you know, all the attention is on vice-chancellors who are on big salaries, but this covers all lecturers across all universities, and many are on much lower wages. And what we've seen is the students are actually quite big numbers supporting the lecturers on this, but at the same time saying, well, if we're not going to have our lectures, we want a refund for our money.
OK, well, let's keep moving on. There's so much to talk about today. June, Stormzy kicked up a storm at the Brits.
He did.
And Theresa May came back to him.
It's a new day in politics when the Prime Minister is having to respond to a grime artist. Isn't it great? So, of course, he called her out over Grenfell in his Brits performance. But then, the next day, backed a petition to have it debated in the Commons, and the petition overnight received over 137,000 signatures. It's even more than that now. And I think it's wonderful to see somebody like him using his platform for a purpose and speaking truth to power.
It's good, but at the same time, Theresa May was not responsible for Grenfell, and all of a sudden people lay
she's
at her door.
responsible for dealing with it.
And she's committed to dealing with that, in fact.
And that's why it's right that these young people are holding her to account.
I think you'll find that they're on the same page.
Katie, let me ask you, the new world of Number 10 these days. Back in the day, an MP put down a question and eventually the Prime Minister would be obliged to respond. Now Stormzy says something on the Brits and the Prime Minister has to respond.
But it's not just Stormzy. Actually, the Prime Minister is doing a lot more of that open government than maybe it was there when I was there. And I appreciate that, and I think that's the way forward. Lots of MPs are saying it's much more of an open door now. You can go in and you can have those discussions.
Do you think your successor would have to go through and knock on the door and say, "Excuse me, Prime Minister, let me tell you about somebody called Stormzy"?
There's always those scenarios. Even if you see something on Twitter and you have to describe to politicians exactly who they are in the first place.
Is she a big grime fan?
I doubt it very much, but Matt Hancock apparently is, so there you go.
All right, let's move on. There's an extraordinary story about Winston Churchill in the Telegraph. Now, the one thing we all knew about Winston Churchill was that he never played away.
Yes, but it seems that is not the case. I mean, Churchy, who knew it? Apparently, he had an affair with a lady called Lady Castleross. who is Cara Delevingne's great aunt. And apparently they had an affair for almost 8 years, and he painted sensuous portraits of her.
And
Who
every
knew?
single paper has this. And for those who are interested in the Churchill story,
about it.
this is genuinely new. This is something none of us knew about before.
Yeah.
OK, finally. A very sad story, I think we're going to have to end on here,
Yes.
which is Alice, this extraordinary actress who we all kind of remember. We remember her very, very compelling and unusual face in Vicar of Dibley and many, many other things. I think for weddings and a funeral she was there too.
Absolutely, Emma Chambers died at such a young age in 53.
53.
And many celebrities have come out today saying that she kind of lit up the screens, and she was very much someone that was warm and generous and kind. I think that she'll be really missed within that community. But we can always watch reruns, and I always think that it's either a really sad thing to lose someone, but the gift that keeps on giving to watch them on the screen still is such a nice
so
thing.
unexpected and so shocking. She always had that gorgeous kind of goofy look. She kind of represented the goofy in all of us.
Well, the role was made for her, actually,
Absolutely.
and she played it to full extent, so much missed.
Much missed. R.I.P. Thank you both very much.